Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
Hello, friends, and welcome to your Daily Detroit. It is Wednesday, August 30th, 2023. I am Jer Stays, and across the table from me is
Norris Howard.
Good to see you, sir.
Yes, I am back in studio.
To start the show off on the most Michigan of topics, the weather's quite nice today, isn't it?
You know, I'm more of a 83 and partly cloudy man myself, so it's a little gloomy for my taste, but it's still a wonderful day here in Detroit.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to get roasted next week.
Oh, boy. It's going to be a lot.
Like, you're going to be able to take the corn out, put it in the foil, put it on the picnic table, and you're good.
And you're good.
All right, we have got 3 stories that we want to talk about today. One just kind of happened. It's going to be our reaction to a speech from Governor Gretchen Whitmer that she delivered up in Lansing about what's next, her priorities for what's next this fall as far as legislative priorities, everything else for the state. We've got the text of the speech. We listened to the speech. We're going to take a few minutes and go through some highlights and kind of what our first reactions are, to say the least. Then we're going to talk about the upcoming mayoral election in Detroit. Now, I know it's a little bit of way away, and I don't necessarily want to talk as much about the candidates, though we will a little bit. For me, it's, are people going to be engaged and invested in this local election and local elections in general? And then finally, we're going to do a little bold speculation on a property that has been empty in Southfield for a long time, but is pretty cool and interesting to talk about. So let's dive into it, Norris.
Yes, sir.
All right. The speech delivered up in Lansing was kind of a way for the governor to publicly state her priorities. You know, there is alignment between the legislature and the governor's office as far as a party perspective. So there's a good chance a number of these things could happen. I feel like this shines a little bit of a light on her agenda and what we might see going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, she hit on a number of key topics that I think most folks will be pretty excited to hear about. Obviously, she talked a little bit about public safety. She talked about healthcare, clean energy as well, which, considering after the storms we had last week and in the fallout from DTE, as per usual, talking about clean energy, I think might rub people a certain way. But she still talked about it. But the thing that I want to point out that really stuck out to me was she wants to commit the remainder of her term to hoping to codify paid family leave in Michigan. Now, for those who may not be aware, and I know most of you are, but paid family leave is, you know, the ability to be able to, if a family member is sick or if somebody is with child, that you are afforded paid time to be able to take care of those people. Most places do. I forgot what the average time is, but you get like a month or 2 months, something like that, mostly in America. Now, obviously, in other developed nations, you get a lot more. But I thought this was very interesting because when she brought this up, I looked up other states that have also codified paid family leave, and they're all growth states. You're talking about Massachusetts, you're talking about New York, you're talking about Washington State, you're talking about those kinds of places that are kind of, I think Texas was the only one that's a growth state that doesn't have paid family leave, which, again, ideologically makes sense. But those are growth states that we're seeing that paid family leave is potentially becoming a carrot at the end of the stick for young families and young people looking to establish roots somewhere. And I think that's huge, especially as we're looking at potentially more women becoming breadwinners in their homes based off national data. So that's going to be a huge deal, I think, moving forward as, you know, Michigan looks to remain a solidly progressive state for the next few years.
And I hear all the things that you're talking about. I think they're very interesting. To me, I look at kind of the economic development side, and I noticed that there was a lot of focus, again, on manufacturing. And no words spent on anything but manufacturing. And I know that like a lot of the bread is buttered in manufacturing for a lot of people politically. I feel like, though, that as long as the governor basically is like manufacturing batteries, it sends a note out to the rest of the world that we don't do more than that.
Yeah.
And that's a criticism that I have. I know it's a speech and she tried to hit a lot of points. To me, I feel like manufacturing is important. Absolutely. And I know that manufacturing is growing, but I do not think that manufacturing is the lone future of the economy of the state.
I mean, it may not be the lone future for the economy of the state, but it kind of is the thing that right now there's been no investments in anything else. There's been no investments in any other industries that would make them viable in the state of Michigan. And that's part of your issue. And here's the thing that I think I find sort of the most troubling about the manufacturing argument is that both parties, both nationally and here locally, have been talking about sort of, we got to get away from the reliance on China. We got to compete with China. And those are correct things to say from a self-sufficiency standpoint. The problem with that is none of the materials needed to make all those things come from America. Rare earth metals are not in America.
I mean, we have them, but we have various environmental regulations that mean that we can't bring them out. We do have some.
We have some, but not enough to be competitive on a global scale in the same way that China and even some nations in Africa do. So there's always going to be this sort of mismatching when we're talking about battery factories. China's going to be a part of that supply chain no matter what. Doesn't matter how many batteries we build actually in America, there's still going to be a dependency on that global market.
There's a fascinating story that Bloomberg reporter Gabrielle Coppola put together about a Michigan company that went bankrupt because they were too early with their tech, that a Chinese company grabbed and took all the tech to China.
Yeah.
And it's outperforming us on a technical specification level. I will put a link in the show notes to it. I actually like to have her on the show because it's really fascinating to see how that foreign capital came in and plucked up a company that we developed the tech, and now it's underpinning a ton of Chinese battery and electric market.
For me, I just feel like when it comes to manufacturing, we know that that's sort of in the DNA of Michiganders, and particularly here in Southeast Michigan and Metro
a lot of
Detroit.
Voters.
And
that's
a lot
what
of
they
voters,
understand
yes.
the economy as.
Yeah, and a lot of voters. But I feel like we have to, and this is, I guess more progressive of me, but we have to move away, or we have to think about other industries. We have to. Because the level of manufacturing that's even going to exist, unless there is massive ideological shift in the entire country where we can start to say full conversion to green energy and we're going to have new green energy jobs. This hasn't happened, and it probably won't happen, at least in our lifetimes. So I don't necessarily see even investment in these manufacturing jobs being the panacea for the economic woes that continue to plague Michigan.
Those jobs don't pay what is competitive that you're seeing in other states. And that is kind of the rub with the incentives and other things like that. So I think it's something that needs to be unpacked a bit more. I think two things I'll mention before I go. Number one, getting rid of those zombie laws, I think, is important.
Yes.
Kudos to that in that regard, because leaving zombie laws on the books, that should have been handled years and years ago. And a lot of legislatures don't want to do it because of the political cost. But I think it's a good idea. The last thing is something that I did not expect her to say, and she did not say it. But when you're talking about energy and clean energy, I'm talking to people on the streets, there's a lot of frustration with the grid, with the power companies, with all of that. And there was no nod to it. Not that I expected any nod to it, but as far as average people, I think, and I'm for like solar and green energy and all those things, but having no acknowledgement of what people are feeling on the ground with that feels kind of empty. And now I know that probably nothing is going to happen with that, but no acknowledgement, I think, feels empty for some folks.
I agree with that. And that's kind of why I brought up the storms from last week, because, green energy is cool, but if the grid doesn't work, it doesn't matter where the energy comes from. If it's not getting to the people, it doesn't matter. But you're starting to see that sentiment begin to take weight. I know in Ann Arbor in particular, they're talking about
to have them on.
They're talking about potentially moving to a public works situation. The thing about that is I find it fascinating. I don't know enough about it to have a full-blown stance on it, but I find it fascinating that Ann Arbor, a wealthy city in Michigan, a progressive city, a city that is just as impacted by a lot of these energy woes as anybody else, is finally just stepping up and saying, you know what, we don't want DTE anymore. As a matter of fact, we're going to figure out a way for us to not have them. And obviously, it takes a lot of economic might to be able to do that, and Ann Arbor has that, but it's still a very fascinating development that's happening in this state that I'm interested to see where it goes.
I agree. I've had a few conversations offline with listeners about Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County. Look, there's resources out there that they have that other areas just don't. I mean, there's some areas of Oakland County, some areas of Wayne County, but Ann Arbor has its own economic strength. It is the biggest force in Washtenaw County. It has the University of Michigan there. There are things that Ann Arbor has the privilege to do that the rest of the region just will not. And we do see this difference in like kind of haves and haves not in the Metro Detroit region now.
Yeah, for sure. So it's definitely a story that I think I want to follow. But, I think this speech was to the point and nothing was particularly shocking. But I will say one thing that I found interesting, and I've, said this common refrain many times on this show, is that public safety is nonpartisan. It is not a thing that
You're not seeing anything about defunding the police in this.
You're not going to see that. And not just that, is that, again, everybody wants to feel safe. It doesn't matter what political persuasion you are. And, seeing quote unquote left-leaning and Democratic
it's a very purple speech. Purple.
Yeah, it's a very purple speech. And I think sometimes we forget that Michigan is a pretty purple state. It's purple, a little more blue than usual, but it's a purple state. And, our neighbors down south are a fuchsia state, not purple. They're kind of a little more red-leaning, but it's a purple state still. There's still a lot of people who are more conservative in this state. And I think public safety is still one of their major policy points, but I think we got to remove that when it comes to people wanting to feel safe. It's literally the foundation of Maslow's hierarchy, like food, water, shelter, and then safety. Like those are the things you need in order to be the beginnings of a human being.
Let's get into some local politics now. The Detroit Free Press reported that City Council President Mary Sheffield has filed paperwork for her Mary Sheffield for Detroit's Future Committee. Now, this is to run for mayor. Now, to me, the act of this is not surprising in any way, shape, or form. I don't know if you agree, but this is not surprising.
No, not shocking whatsoever.
The other thing is that people are saying, well, she isn't waiting for Mayor Mike Duggan to declare if he's going to run or not or whatever. I don't think he's going to. I think he's going for governor. I think
she's doing it precisely because there's probably been conversation and rumblings that he probably won't. That's how I feel. I have no evidence to back that up. I'm just saying I feel like you wouldn't make the exploratory committee unless you knew a
or
major
had a
force.
Good chance.
Yeah, or had a good chance unless you knew a major force in the region, which is what Mayor Duggan is getting out the way.
Yeah, because it would make things real awkward if there wasn't, right? If there wasn't the, hey, you do your thing, I'm not going to be mad at you if you do it. Because they were appearing at events together and all this other kind of stuff. This is just my speculation. I think that Duggan is going to be done after this term. I think he may very well run for governor or decide he's done. But I think that that's what's ahead because he's made that promise. And I think he will keep to that one where he's not going to run for governor while being in office or whatever. I think he's going to live up to that. But in general, my bigger point is not about the individual candidates because this is 2025 we're talking about. To me, it's about engagement. We've had lukewarm to appallingly low turnout for elections in Detroit and local elections in general when it isn't tied to a bigger ballot issue, when you don't have things like, abortion on the ballot. Marijuana, things like that. People are far more aligned towards issues than individual local candidates. I even think about in the suburbs, the former mayor of Taylor thrown in the clink for fraud. Yes. Did it make a news story? Did people really resonate or care? No. And I feel like there is like a deterioration of interest, not just coverage by individuals, which, by the way, people like Detroit Documenters are doing a great job of covering meetings, things like that. But I feel like there is a general less interest in those kind of local elections. And I think there are multiple reasons why Detroiters are less interested in local elections. And that has shown up because I'll see these things online. Well, you only need to get 70,000 votes, blah, blah. It's not all Detroiters. But you know what? If Detroiters cared, like if enough opposition was there, you would see the energy behind an opposition candidate. And people online act like Duggan didn't win with like almost 3/4 of the vote.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about Detroit, particularly over the past 20 years, you have an apathetic voter base because, let's be honest, and this is me talking about as somebody who was kind of living through this as it happened. When Kwame got caught up in all that mess, there was just such a deterioration of the trust in the functions of government, I think, for many Detroiters, because right after that, then you have, special elections for mayor, and then you had Mayor Bing. And
you got bankruptcy.
You had bankruptcy and the emergency manager. And so there was this feeling of just a lack of control in your own political future for Detroiters. And I think we have to always put that veneer, especially amongst people my age, a little bit younger, and definitely people older, around local elections when it comes to the city of Detroit, because there has been a actual takeover in this city of a large municipality. And I think it's really hard for us to kind of separate that. I think that's step one. I think step two also is that for as much as Mayor Duggan has been I don't want to quite say polarizing figure, but as much as he's been a noticeable figure, I don't consider him a dynamic figure. I don't consider him the most engaging politician in the world. And let's be honest, in the 2020s, there's cult of personality politics is the wave. It's the move. It's how you get people interested. It's how you get people to come out and vote for you, unless it's a grievance policy issue, right? So I feel like for somebody like Mary Sheffield, who I think is one of the more known politicians in the region, I think is a good move for her. I think it would be something that allows the women of the city to definitely become more engaged, because it would be historic. And so anytime you're able to make history, it's a lot easier to engage people because they're able to put that feather in their cap. I'm very proud of the fact that the first president I was able to vote for was Barack Obama. I loved it. That was a thing I will tell my children, if I ever have them, or tell whoever. I love that. So I think the engagement levels also come down to just the nature of how politics is fed to the masses, and we just haven't done that regionally. We haven't done that in Detroit. We saw it on the state scale, but we just haven't done it in Detroit.
I wonder too, though, you do have a situation of some declining demographics. African-American flight is still very real in the city. To me, people get engaged with local politics once they've got roots in.
Yes.
And I think that's another symptom of that flight, even though lots of people disagree with me that it's a back and forth thing. Like, the census issue is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. To me, it's part of that move to the suburbs where you still have that goal by many families of like, when I get some money, I'm hitting the suburbs, or I'm going to go to a suburban school, or
right.
You name it. Whether you agree with it or not, it seems to be pretty real in the data. And to me, people get more involved with local politics, not when they're 25 years old and going to the bars. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that.
Right.
Very passionate people. But most people don't get engaged until they buy a house, or they're a bit older and they're seeing kind of the impacts of that stuff. And so I feel like a lot of those people, if you've got one foot out the door, you're not going to be as engaged in your local system.
I think that is a major part of it, but I think that not only does the city a disservice, I think it still does a disservice to the people who decided to stay. And I think the candidates haven't necessarily done the best job at engaging those folks.
Over the last few terms.
Over the last few terms, at engaging the folks who potentially do have a foot already out the door. I think it's important to capture the young adult, young professional cohort, because first of all, it's not millennials anymore. We're old. Like, we're in our 30s and having kids and stuff. You got to start talking about Gen Z. And by the way, you're not going to capture Gen Z by talking about manufacturing. To your point earlier in the show.
Or Flex and Gate, or all the things that are considered as big economic victories right now. Stellantis.
Yeah, you're not going to capture Gen Z with that kind of stuff. So you got to start talking about either what's your plan for the future in order to diversify the workforce and the economy in the city of Detroit, or you got to start talking about how you are going to be a cult of personality type person that is going to be magnetic and get people to want to be here.
Criticism I've gotten in trouble for, but I'll say it publicly. I don't see this current administration having the kind of forward vision for that generation. I look at it as opportunities come up. They try to execute really well on opportunities. They try to execute really well on like the right in front of them. But what is Detroit going to be in 2050? I don't see as much of that vibe.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's really hard, especially when you essentially have...
Well, all those things that were happening, you kind of had to be right in front of you. But I feel like we have to change our focus a little bit.
There you go. You took the words out of my mouth. I think there has to be a shift in focus. And I'm not sure who has the best ideas for that. It's way too early for us to say that. But I think it's really, important for somebody like Mary Sheffield to be in the running. To me, that shows that there is a willingness for somebody different to do something. And that is encouraging.
All right. Finally, on today's show, I want to talk a little bit about something in Southfield because it's an interesting piece of architectural history designed by Minoru Yamasaki. This is the former Reynolds Metal headquarters built in 1959. It's over by Northland.
Yep.
Well, what's going to be Northland Apartments, what used to be Northland Mall, right there next to the lodge. I've actually walked past this building a number of times. I've driven past it, whatever. It is very interesting because it's got a beautiful kind of like outside view to it that is reminiscent of the Reynolds Manufacturing Company that did aluminum siding, aluminum parts, all those things. It was like a big thing. This was a regional sales office. Inside some of the photos, and I will link to the auction site where you can see the mid-century modern bones there. It's been vacant for a really long time. And the opening bid is like $65,000 for this big facility. And I'm like, all right, let's put our future hats on. This is an interesting corner of Southfield that could use a little bit more love.
Yeah.
But there's bones here that could be something interesting. In the supervision hat. And let's try to say how the most practical line is: buy it for $65,000, make it a self-storage space and be done with it. But I hate all that. Let's not talk the most practical. Let's talk big vision here.
Yeah, I don't know, because I have context of it. It used to be a Bally's Health and Fitness.
Really? I did not know that.
For many years. That's what I remember growing up not too far from there. I don't know what it could be, because the problem is that the location of it is so odd.
But
right?
Could be good. I mean, it's Northland Drive and the lodge. Like, it's easy in, easy out.
But it's not, though. It's like, to get to that actual lot, you have to go on to 8 Mile, and you have to kind of go through a weird catty corner. Like, that drive is almost like a back road, right? So it's not the most easy to get to, hard to get to. It's Detroit. It's easy to get to from most perspectives, but it's just kind of off the beaten path. That's the thing I want to say. It's off the beaten path a little bit. I have no idea what they can make it. I mean, you could turn it into a Planet Fitness, because it used to be a fitness place back in the day. Or, I think, as we move away from offices and talking about the digital divide and talking about how a lot of people don't have internet service, I think you turn it into a server farm. And you just put a bunch of servers in there. Make it pretty on the outside. Make it pretty on the outside and put a bunch of servers in there. And hopefully continue to build the internet infrastructure in Southeast Michigan, because, we're going to need that kind of stuff, especially if a whole bunch of apartments are about to go up right there at the former Northland site. You know what? Why not? Why not make a server farm?
Well, it's interesting. Although this data was kind of focused on the city of Detroit, there was something that came in our inbox recently about like gaming and internet connectivity or something. I know that's your kind of beat. You saw that.
Yeah.
And just making sure that there is enough internet for these places. I don't know if it's possible. I mean, I'm looking through these pictures. There's like a little hot tub pool in there. There's a giant parking lot. There's like a boxing gym.
Yeah.
That is ridiculous. I mean, there's things you could do with this space.
You can do a bunch of things. Me saying turn it into a server farm is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But
part apartments, part physical activity. You could do something creative.
You could. And the thing is, Southfield wants more people to move out there. You could get people a chance to live in a really beautiful building. Turn it into some apartments with a gym next to it. Why not? Sure.
And the parking lot's huge.
Yeah.
Decrepit. You could just put something else there.
Yeah, just blacktop it. It's fine.
Would love to get your thoughts. I'll put a link in the show notes. And it is up for auction. Opening bid, like $65,000. So something to check out. All right, with that, we are done with your Daily Detroit for this Wednesday. As always, thank you to our members, patreon.com/dailydetroit. You help keep this thing going. Norris Howard, where can people find you?
You can find me at Great Laker Nori everywhere on social media. So that's Great Laker Nori.
With that, I am Jer Stays. Do not forget to tell a friend about the show. Remember that you are somebody. We'll see you around Detroit.